Hi, everybody. It's Pastor Tom, the 24 Today podcast. Thank you again so much for joining me today. I love to interview people because I love to learn, and I really believe that what I'm learning can also help you as well. Today, my special guest is Nancy Virden. I've been able to talk with Nancy before and enjoyed our conversation so much that I wanted to have her back on again, and we could discuss again what she is so passionate about, and that is trying to help people like myself who struggle with depression and who just have different things that she herself has gone through. So she has made this her ministry. And by the way, her website is alwaysthefight.com, and you can go there and find out really good things from Nancy. And Nancy, good to see you again, and welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Tom. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. You are known as a mental health advocate, which that title in and of itself is scary. And I know you didn't give yourself that title. That's just what we call folks like yourself that's trying to help people that struggle with depression and anxiety and different things. But let's just talk briefly about that, because mental health, with that term, it causes us to think like wrong things, like somehow something's wrong in our head that we should be ashamed about, and it's really not that at all. It's just struggling in some way on how we're thinking or what we're going through in our mind. Is that too simplified?
Not at all. The mental health is something that every single one of us deal with every single day, because we either have it or we're struggling with it.
Right.
And it is a natural result of life that can be difficult to have difficulties with your mental stability at any given time. It's a matter of extremes. So when we're talking about somebody who's having a very bad day and they're maybe, kicking a pebble down the sidewalk or something because they're mad, that's one thing. And then you've got somebody else who just is really struggling with anger to the point of hurting themselves. That's we are talking about extremes here. But mental health itself is common to all people.
Right. And somehow in the church, that this whole idea is just not talked about very much, of right. Not dealing right with anger or depression or anxiety or fear or whatever it might be. And again, it's almost like somehow still, even in these modern days, we look at it like it's some form of weakness or something that we should be ashamed about. And that's just not the truth. I mean,
that's not.
No more than I should be ashamed about having to go to the mechanic because my car is out of tune. It's just right. The way it is. Our bodies get out of tune, and this world is so complicated that we struggle from time to time.
And we are complicated too. I mean, yeah. Each one of us is complex.
Sure.
It's so easy to sit back and go, oh, well, I would never react that way. Well, first of all, you don't know if you would. Mm-hmm. And secondly, even if you wouldn't, that doesn't mean the other person is doing something wrong or weak.
Sure.
They have a different complex system than you do.
Right.
And
I find that actually maybe a little aggravating when if I say I'm depressed, actually someone's actually come back with like, what do you have to be depressed about?
Exactly.
Well,
right.
As though that there's nothing that I would have in my life that could be out of sorts. Right. But the other thing that's a little aggravating for those of us that struggle from time to time with depression is the assumption that there's just like one thing, like we can just figure, oh yeah, it's that. And yeah. So because it's not that easy. It's not just one thing, and it's not so easy to figure out. And so that's a struggle for me. It's trying to find that whatever. It's just not that easy.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
We're spirit, mind, and body, and
yeah.
That is a biblical statement there. And we are not a part of any one of those three. We are all those three
Mm-hmm.
all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever we're struggling in the mind, we have probably physical and spiritual issues going on. Whenever we struggle with spiritual issues, we probably have mental and physical issues going on. I don't know what that means. I'm not a scientist. I'm not God.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that when we struggle in any one of those areas, it certainly affects the other
Mm-hmm.
two. So to take aside somebody who's maybe dealing with a mental issue at the moment, such as depression, and say, "Oh, that's all a spiritual issue," is completely
Sure.
off balance, because we are all three all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, depression has been a combination of physical, mental, and spiritual challenges that needed to be met.
I love your website.
Thank you.
It is alwaysthefight.com, and it's easy to find, just alwaysthefight.com. And on that site, Nancy, and these are your words, you say, "I have felt so hopeless, I tried to die. No one could convince me life was worth continuing, although several tried. Was hope there anyway?" So those are your words. Can you tell me a little bit about what prompted that you felt so hopeless that you tried to die?
Well, again, we go back to causes, right? What makes somebody so depressed? Bottom line is that I'd been dealing with depression off and on since I was a teenager. And I can look back at my past and I can say, okay, well, this was my childhood. This was the family I grew up in. It was hostile and violent. And I grew up into that. And then I married, into a marriage that was almost completely emotionally negligent. And so I can point to things, right? And I can say, okay, well, that's it. That's what did it. The fact is that being a complex person, there's a lot of causes, a lot of issues for depression. But I have had several, not many, episodes since I was a teenager. So in 2011, it was a culmination of a lot of things. But bottom line is, I had my hope all wrapped up in a loveless marriage. I thought if my husband would only love me, I'd be okay. And I didn't realize that I was idol worshiping. I thought that, it was appropriate, and it is appropriate to expect your spouse to love you,
sure,
treat you kindly, but I didn't realize that I had taken that to such an extreme that I was not worth living if I didn't have that. So after a suicide attempt, many people tried to tell me my life was worthwhile, and I was like, no, it can't be until I have the love of this one person. It's been a journey, of course, obviously, with the Lord teaching and rearranging my thinking patterns and so on. But one of the brightest things that he taught me was that my hope is in Him all the time. There isn't anything else that can go well or wrong that's going to change the value of my life. And it is when I said, was hope there anyway, that I'm trying to explain that, yeah, hope was there, but we can be blind to it. I was blind to it. I didn't see that God could use me anymore. And if He could, then somebody else could do it better anyway. And depression didn't mess with my faith. It messed with my thinking.
Yes.
So faith was intact, and I knew the Savior and that God would use me, so on and so forth. But depression was telling me nothing was worthwhile. And so, yeah, if I answered your question, I hope.
No, you did. Yeah, depression is almost like looking at life through really dark glasses.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the glasses on, your vision still is okay. You can still see fine, but boy, when you put those glasses on, everything has a darker context, or it just doesn't look the same. So, I've as a pastor, I've talked with people who are very gifted, which just they believe that they're not gifted, but I can see how gifted they are, but they can't see that. Or
know?
I've seen people who just believe they are so ugly,
Yeah.
physically ugly, but yet if you ask 10 people, they would all say this person is beautiful, but they can't see it
No.
because, as you said, it really does start with the mind, and there are so many passages of Scripture that really talk about the importance of the mind and us trying to see ourselves as God sees us, but that so many of the ways that Satan attacks us really starts with the mind, and so that's really what you're saying. I hear, and really what you're trying to help people with is to develop a mindset that's different, a mindset that's different than what they have when they come to your website.
Hmm. Well, we have all been taught messages, and we've accepted them. Not all of them, but we've accepted some of them, and we have a tendency, I should say, as humans, to reinforce what we already believe.
Mm.
So we see the evidence, so-called evidence out
Mm.
there to prove what we believe. So if we think we're ugly, we're going to grasp every moment that proves that, such as, oh, I woke up this morning and I have bed hair. Okay, I must be really, really
Sure,
ugly.
sure.
So all of a sudden that becomes a big deal because we're reinforcing a
Mm.
belief that's already there. When we can challenge those messages, and especially when we can challenge the messengers, we can start to understand that maybe this person or these people or this society who sent us this message
Mm.
was wrong.
Yeah.
And that changes everything.
Yes. And those
So
messengers can be the way, even sometimes our parents, the way we grew up, or certainly can be other people or kids in school, and yeah.
absolutely. And some messages are perceived. I
Yes.
don't remember anybody ever telling me. I don't recall anybody ever telling me that if I cussed, I would go to hell. But I
Mhm.
had that in my
Sure.
mind as a kid, right?
Yes. Yes.
And if I cussed, I'd go to hell. And somehow, some way, that was perceived through, um, the teaching about obeying God or something.
Right.
And
And then how distorted of an understanding do you get of God and the fact that really it's about a relationship with God and not whether or not we can keep our mouth totally pure, in the words that we say. I was not taught that by the church, but when I was growing up, you remember those little tracts that people would pass out, those little things that people pass out on the street? Well,
yeah,
I got a hold of one of those that actually did say things like
yeah,
that. Like if you die and moments before you died, like you were driving down a road or something, moments before you died, someone cut you off, and so you had the swear word and that comes out of your mouth, and then you die. Well, then you're going to go to hell. All those
my.
just crazy things that
There's
give us.
no there's no concept there,
Yeah,
none of God's grace or His
yeah.
greatness or how.
Yeah, that's like saying that if you're married and you have a fight with your spouse, like you're automatically going to be divorced,
Right,
because of that. It's not it's a
right,
relationship. You
right,
you have a fight, you say you're sorry, and you work it out, but it doesn't mean the whole thing is over with.
right.
But then there's a mindset that if you live with that mindset, then your whole way of looking at God is distorted. So that's again, that's what we're talking about here. That you can have a improper mindset toward
You can,
yourself or
yes,
toward life, and if that mindset is wrong, then if you see the world as flat, then everything you somehow will be able to see that truth, or you'll twist whatever you see to make it seem like the world is flat.
exactly.
So on your site, again, it's alwaysthefight.com. Nancy, on your site, there's an area that you can easily access on your homepage that is entitled "Gain and Maintain a Mindset of Hope."
Right.
And if our listeners would just click on that, the subtitle then it says, "We can develop a mindset of hope while it seems there is none." So what I would like to do is unpack that a little bit with you, because I think that it's important for those that are listening that might be struggling with feeling hopeless, or in some way, they're living off the wrong mindset. Maybe they're depressed, maybe whatever it is. Let's talk about that. So you say, how can we gain and maintain a mind of hope? And you have 3 points there, and the first one is that we need to have motivating values. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. It's important to know what we really want out of life. I remember being asked by a therapist once, what is it you want? And that was such a shocking question, because I hadn't considered what I wanted. I was trying to do everything that was right for other people, or so, so I
Sure.
thought.
Uh-huh.
When we have an idea of who we are and what we want out of life, it guides us. So I started to write down, this was way back when, again, about 2011, when I was still in recovery from the depression and suicide attempt. I started to write down what it is that I valued most. And at the top of my list was honoring God. Now, I've been a Christian for a long, long time. And so this was something that has just poured into my being. And I still wanted to honor God. I just didn't think I could, or didn't know how. And once I wrote that down, then I could start asking questions, such as, is what I'm doing this moment honoring God? At the moment, because of where I was, I had to start questioning whether suicide was honoring God. It was something I really wanted, and in fact, I attempted again in the hospital. So it was a tough recovery, and getting out of that mindset of hopelessness and despair took some time. For me to ask the question, is what I'm doing honoring God? At the very least, it put a question mark at the end of suicide instead of a period. So I had to start asking myself those things, and I felt like, even though I didn't really feel the Lord's presence, like I said, my faith, I knew he was there. And I just would ask for his help to just do the most minor things. I can't get out of bed, God, help me take a shower today, or help me, whatever it was, very, very tiny sometimes that you can do. In the hospital, it was simple things like, help me to get out from under the covers and stuff like that. And the answer wasn't always a rush of energy or anything like that. It was what I needed in the moment was always the answer. But it was because I wanted to honor God. It was because I had that value that I would even ask him. So another value that I had was not shaming me, not shaming myself. And some of my behaviors around depression get a little embarrassing. And it was a time for me to question, what kind of person do I want to be? And what steps can I take towards becoming that kind of person? This was several months after the suicide attempt itself. I was home. I was in intensive therapy. And I wrote a big sign on my wall, and it asked that very question. What kind of person do you want to be? What steps can you take today toward becoming that person? The steps each day were different. Some days I just stared at it and stuck up my tongue. I'm not gonna have anything to do with that. And some days I was challenged to do the most minor things, anywhere from texting a friend to reading the Bible to washing the dishes. It doesn't matter when you're totally depressed and you can't find a reason for living. Every little thing that you do is a big. So that's what I mean by motivating values, is exploring what that means to you. What is it you want, and then operating towards that.
And you really had to make a decision on did you want to live or did you want to die? I mean, which did you want more?
I wanted to die more,
right?
But
you had to make it.
God. And so I had to question it. I had to question whether dying was going to honor him, and ultimately, no, it wouldn't. I had to question, honoring him, of course, is obeying his will, and so I had to seek his will instead of just my own. Eventually, the will to live and the desire to live came, but it did take some time.
So the first one in gaining that mindset of hope is determining what you want more. Do you want it enough, right? Do you want to have hope?
Well,
am I saying that right or not?
I'm not sure. And you know
Okay.
what? The reason why I hesitate is because it depends on where you are in the process.
Okay.
If you are so depressed that you've just tried to kill yourself and you're in the hospital and you can't think of any reason why you should still be alive, you're not going to want hope.
Okay.
You're not going to want that. Your
Okay.
feeling is not going to be towards, oh, I can't wait until I get my life back together.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking,
Right.
people are different. But when you're in the process of recovery and you're questioning your values, and for me, it was I want to honor God. And for some people, it might be I don't want to hurt so-and-so, or I don't want to leave my kids, or whatever the value might
Okay.
be. There's a there's a change in your spirit eventually when you keep striving for that thing that you want, or away from the thing that you don't want.
Okay.
And that eventually changes, and so eventually you kind of want hope. You kind of want something to hang on to so that you can get to that goal and be who you want to be. But right away, no, not for me anyway. It was a battle every day for months. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want hope. What I actually say in that article is that the first step towards gaining hope is to believe for it.
Okay.
When you're so hopeless and helpless and believing that there's nothing for you, why would you want something that doesn't exist? Hope doesn't exist for you, right?
Sure.
So believing that other people might be telling the truth was kind of a stepping stone for me.
So we are starting at the most basic point, and I think maybe some of our listeners, perhaps they really haven't been at that point. So the assumption is, why wouldn't you want hope? I mean, why wouldn't you want? But we're talking about when you are at that point, you are so bottomed out, which other people that are listening are totally right there, and they understand you. I just need to do the most basic thing, and that's just want to get better, or want to
just believe that hope exists. For me, the reason why motivating values are so important is because if you don't have any, what are you going to reach for other than death? You have some reason to keep breathing. And for me, it was honoring God. I didn't believe I was dishonoring him by attempting suicide. Okay. What drew me into trying to get well at all was the question mark at the end of suicide. Would that honor God? And not being sure of that, I needed to hang around long enough to find out. It's everybody's complicated.
Sure,
and
I know.
It's different, and not everybody's going to have the same experience. But having a value that something important to you that gives you a reason to do or don't do is important. So we need to ask those questions. What is it that I want?
We are going to continue this conversation. We've got a couple more points that are very valuable, and if you're just listening in, my guest is Nancy Virden, and her website is alwaysthefight.com. I am Pastor Tom. This is the 24 Today podcast, and you can find out more about me at 24today.org, or also I have a site, tomwhitesel.com also. But Nancy, let's continue now to talk about this whole idea of developing a mindset of hope. If there's someone that's listening that is just going through a time of depression, or maybe they've even, as you have had, maybe they've even had some thoughts of suicide.
Right.
So we have discussed so far in order to develop a mindset of hope, because our struggles so often start in the way that we're thinking and viewing life. We've talked about the first one of being motivating values. And then second, you list on your website in this article, acting opposite. And I really like this. So motivating values, and then secondly, acting opposite. I'm just going to give you one of your statements to start
Okay.
this section off. You say, I felt insulted when told I live according to my emotions. That doesn't happen to be true all the time. Nonetheless, it has been more often than I like. Hope can grow in strength as we practice acting opposite of how negative emotions suggest we act.
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
Oh, well, I remember sitting in an intensive therapy group, actually, and a woman just said, well, a thought is just a thought. And I imagine in my mind, I've never had anybody actually explain this to me, but I imagine that everyone in the world, except for a handful of us, is going, duh. but for me, it was a newsflash. A thought is just a thought. You don't have to carry it out. And the same with moods and feelings. It's just a mood. It's just a feeling. And we don't have to follow through with what it's prompting us to do. Acting opposite is a challenge to whatever thought we're having or whatever feeling we're struggling with. Anger, for instance. For some reason, that's coming up today. Oh my! I don't know why, Tom.
Are you getting angry at me? Is that what you're trying to say?
I don't know. But anger, for one, I know that when I am angry, I feel very righteous. I feel like I've got it all figured out and the other person does not. And I'm right, they're wrong. It's that black and white. So for me to take an anger moment and to sit down with it and to just feel it and to go through it and to ask questions of it, such as, why? Are you sure? What does the evidence say? You know, what has been the history, and so on and so forth. And of course, take it to the Lord. To do that is to act opposite of what I want to do, which is probably tell somebody off. So that's just one example. And when we think of anger, I think it's pretty obvious how we can avoid causing more trouble for ourselves by taking a step back. But when we're dealing with something like depression, it might not be so obvious. And anxiety too. When we're feeling depression, and what we want to do is crawl in bed and hide under the covers.
Right.
It may be better for us to act opposite of that. What would we be doing that moment if we were not depressed? Well, maybe we'd be going to work. Maybe we'd be getting up and cooking dinner. Maybe we'd be whatever. So go do that thing instead of crawling under the covers.
Maybe we would open those window blinds. That's not how we. That's not what we feel like doing.
Exactly.
Maybe we would go out for a walk outside. It's not what we feel like doing. And really, we have to make ourselves do things that we know, or Scripture tells us is right. We have to make ourselves do those things, even though we don't feel it at the moment.
Right. Exactly.
So here are some other examples that you have in terms of acting opposite. You say, act opposite by reaching out, act opposite by allowing support, act opposite by facing emotions, act opposite by accepting a different perspective. Would you like to talk about any one of those?
Oh, sure. The different perspective one is huge, because I think that it's very easy for us to isolate and to wrap up into what we're feeling and, what's going on with us and just feel like we're all alone in the world and, I'm the only one who struggles like this and so on and so forth. And that's normal. That's not a bad thing anybody should feel guilty about. It's normal. It's what we do, especially when we're struggling. But it's also important then to step out and say, okay, I need a different perspective. Not only what does the Bible say, because that's important, but also what does somebody else say who's got their act together? Perhaps someone professional. The reason I suggest professionals because those people have the training to know what to ask and how to ask it. It might not be so helpful, for instance, if you're feeling low on yourself, to go to your sibling who's always putting you down and ask them for their perspective. Probably not a great idea. Okay. But to reach out for somebody who you can trust, who's never hurt you, and ask them, what is it what value do you see in me, for instance, that perspective can be incredibly encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to get out of our heads, because we just stay there in this mumble jumble, and it's like we're just going in a circle with all these thoughts, and we're not changing anything. And having somebody interject a different thought can uproot all the negativity. It's important.
Sure. For those that are listening in, we've got one more really valuable point that I want to ask Nancy about, but I would encourage you to go to her website. There's a lot there, not only on the topic that we are talking about, but there's just it's just a great resource. Again, it's alwaysthefight.com. Nancy, in fact, maybe you could tell us just a little bit about the different things that we can find on your site and the best ways of contacting you.
Well, sure. Well, the best way to contact me is through the website, because there's a contact form there.
Okay.
You can find that on the welcome page and other places, I believe, as well.
Yep.
But in my bio there, you'll get my statement of faith, you'll get the testimonials about me, but more than importantly, you're going to get pages and pages of resources, people you can call, blogs you can read, the kinds of services that you can reach out to for help.
Okay.
It is the blog itself, the Compassionate Love blog, is whatever comes to mind on that day. It's semi-weekly, so twice a week it's been going, and it will discuss all kinds of emotional and spiritual issues.
Sure.
So it's thick with things. I think the one that went out today, for instance, is commenting on the California wildfires.
Right, I read that. Yeah, it's good.
Yes, and how we need something other than material possessions to be our most important things. So,
sure.
Yeah.
It's a very good blog and good site. I would suggest people check that out and make it a part of their daily or weekly life, just to go and find out more from Nancy. Nancy, let's talk more now about this idea of gaining and maintaining a mindset of hope. Mm-hmm. We have talked about first that we need to make sure that we have motivating values. Secondly, acting opposite than what we're feeling at that time. And then thirdly, you say change words.
Yeah.
For instance, we could change should to could, or can't.
Yeah,
should to could.
Should to could.
Yeah. or can't to it will be difficult, or never to unlikely. And those are just a few, but you have others that can be found on your website in this article. But you want to talk a little bit about changing our words.
Sure. I was someone who fed negativity to myself constantly, and I try not to exaggerate. When I say constantly and all the time, I mean that. It was a forever and conversation in my own head about how worthless I was, and that went on for decades. Mm-hmm. So when I realized that changing my words towards myself was a suggestion by a therapist, I thought, well, okay, whatever, I'll try it. Mm-hmm. And I found myself walking across the parking lot and thinking to myself, "You're so stupid." Mm-hmm. I have no idea now, Tom, what it was I'd done or said or thought was stupid. Chances are I just existed.
It doesn't take much, or doesn't, because we are so mean to ourselves. We say things to ourselves we would never say
to anyone else.
Yeah, even people we dislike the most in life. We would never be that cruel, but we do it to ourselves. So I can understand. It wouldn't matter what it is that you say, "I'm so stupid."
Exactly. And so I was walking across the parking lot, heading into my apartment at the time, and I was thinking, I'm so stupid. And then I thought, wait a minute, what if I changed this word? And so I turned it into a little game, like whenever I'm thinking of a negative term for myself, such as worthless or whatever, change the first letter, take the first letter of the word and change it into something else. And so I thought, okay, I'm so stupid. And I thought, okay, well, I'm smart. And it sounded ridiculous to me at the time,
Mm-hmm.
What happened is the more I played that game, the more I practiced it, I was amazed at how my mind started to change. I wasn't even expecting it to change. I thought it was going to seem like a useless game forever. Or, for as long as I did it, I thought it was just going to be useless. And I was absolutely stunned to find out that it actually lifted my mood to change those words. And even though I struggled to believe them, it was still affecting me in a positive way. Eventually, I began to believe them. So instead of "you're so stupid, you're so smart," I started looking for that evidence that we talked about before. You're looking for the evidence to support what you already believe. So instead of looking for all the evidence that I was stupid, I started looking for evidence that was smart. It wasn't easy to find right away. My attitude about myself wasn't great, right? But I started to see little things, just little things. And I started to acknowledge the little things. For instance, I'm so smart might be that I was clever in how I handled a conversation or something like that. And giving myself credit for that instead of walking away going, "Oh, you're so stupid, you probably made a fool of yourself." It just started to change how I presented myself, how I thought about myself. Hope started to arise out of that because my negative self-talk was not hammering on me anymore. And it's self-abuse is what it is.
Yes, it is.
And so as long as you're being abusive to yourself, you are an abused person. Mm-hmm. You're going to face life like that. So it was so different, so very different. And that's what I mean. Mm-hmm. So there's a list of things in that article, just suggestions of words that we can change. I'm not talking about a Pollyanna approach. You read earlier, changing can't to "it will be difficult." I'm not suggesting we jump from can't to can and hopeless to hopeful, because sometimes those leaps are too great. But what we can accept is the reality of, "Oh, I think I can't, but it will be difficult when I try." Or, "I'm not hopeful, but I can believe for hope." Or, it will be challenging, or that kind of thing. Accepting the fact that there is a possibility instead of impossibility.
So you were saying just a little practical game that you play, which it's more than a game because it ends up being a real tool for life to because it causes us to use our minds in a positive way and begin to think differently. But did I hear you right? So you're saying whatever the bad thing that you say about yourself, whatever that word starts with, and you find a more positive thing with the same letter of that word. So if I say, "I am so fat," then I would have to think, like, "I am so funny."
Yeah,
and then think of how I have a way to make people laugh, or I have God's given me a sense of humor. So that's what you're saying?
Exactly. Okay. That's a great example. Sure.
Because it's true, right?
I'm
not
true.
Fat, I'm funny. See, you're just laughing. Or maybe I'm fat and funny, but anyway.
It is true, because the world, and especially in America, is telling us that, if we're overweight, we have less value. Mm-hmm. And that is a lie from hell. We might have a challenge in our lives that we need to correct or work on, but we are not less valuable. Mm. And so to take a word that we perceive as so negative and cutting and turn it into, "Oh, you know what? The evidence is actually true that I'm funny. Mm-hmm. So this is something that I can be glad about myself."
Nancy, it's been a joy again to talk with you, and I want to mention just one more thing as we wrap things up here in a moment, but just a reminder again, I'm Pastor Tom. You can find out more about me at 24today.org or tomwhitesel.com, and please, though, go to Nancy's site, which is alwaysthefight.com. Nancy Virden, again, is my guest name, and on that site you can just find so many good things. In fact, the the very section of her website that we're talking about right now, which is called Gaining and Maintaining a Mindset of Hope. You can go right to that section, and you can read more in depth about what we're mentioning. Let's wrap up this conversation, Nancy, with just a biblical thought or biblical story or analogy. It's called the Pearl of Great Price, and it's a story that's in the book of Matthew. And would you tell us a little bit about that story and how, again, actually in this very article, you say we should put that into a modern context and get the most out of it for today's living?
Sure. And of course, the context I'm talking about is seeking mental health care, finding hope and becoming well mentally and emotionally is what the context is for me. The story in the Bible is simply a man is out in the field, he's working a field, he finds a pearl of great price. And so he goes and sells everything he owns and buys that land. And then the pearl is his, right?
Right.
What we have often in our minds about seeking mental health care is it's too costly, or it won't help, or I knew so-and-so and they didn't get help. What we're afraid to do is step out and sell everything we have to gain the most important thing in life, and that is a mind that is working, a mind that is stable, so that we can actually have a relationship with Christ that is meaningful, so that we can actually develop an understanding of the scriptures that is perhaps evading us right now. That if we can invest in our mental health, we will begin to see the scriptures, as I have, come alive in ways that they didn't before, because the issues in the mind, the messages and other such things in the mind were interfering. That blockage that was between me and God disappeared when I took the time to essentially, what's the word? Not literally, but figuratively, selling everything I had and seeking wisdom from the people who had it to offer to me. That has changed everything. It was expensive financially. It took up a lot of my time. And in fact, for about 4 years, I felt like that's all I did was go to therapy. I'm not saying that has to look like that for somebody else, but it might. And why run from it? When at the end of that time period, you're going to have the whole brand new life that you never dreamed was possible.
And it's worth it, isn't it?
Buy the land, invest in it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Nancy, it's my hope that people will go to your site and find out more of the helpful information there. You also enjoy speaking at places and helping others. And if someone wants you to speak at their church or organization, they can contact you again on your site and find out more about that and get you scheduled for such an occasion. Again, Nancy, thank you for what you do and for being a blogger and just an advocate for those like myself that struggle with wrong thinking. And
let's call it stinking thinking instead of wrong.
Right. Stinking thinking.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a word that begins with, anyway, stinking thinking. That's good. So Nancy, I will be checking out your site and looking forward to just hearing more from you. Thank you again for being my guest on the 24 Today podcast.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome, and it's just a chance now for me to remind you that if you're enjoying this, if this is helpful for you, if you would do myself and Nancy a favor, if you would like this, if you would share this podcast, or if you're viewing it on YouTube, if you would comment on it, that would be a big help for us to be able to get this message out to other people. And also, again, if you're listening, as I always say, that just a reminder, there's still time left in this 24-hour period to live life today.